Alrighty, welcome to day 3 of the NNP Symposium. This hour we are here with Kellen Hoard, who we had last year as well, and we are very excited to have him back. This time we'll be hearing about some of the conditions around the next generation and younger coin collectors and how they approach the hobby. So a reminder to the audience, we will be doing a Q&A at the end. So you can click on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any time and send in questions. We'll be discussing those at the end of the presentation, so don't be concerned if we don't bring it up immediately. We'll get there at the end. Let's see. Otherwise, I think we're ready to get started. Kellen, I will let you take it away. Just go ahead and unmute yourself, and I'll be back at the end for the Q&A.
Thank you, Liana. All right. Well, my name is Kellen. I'm thrilled to be back for the 3rd symposium now, and talking today about a topic that I think is a little bit under discussed at some point, which is not necessarily the fact of how we get new collectors, but rather the fact that there already are a bunch of new young collectors who are excited to be a part of the hobby and who we can really help foster their growth and continue to make them lifelong collectors. And so this is just kind of based on my experiences about these new collectors and their approach to the hobby, just for our own insight, but also so we can help and make sure that they continue to be numismatists. So we can leap right into it here. So what is this presentation not about? It's not about how to get new young collectors. Like I said, there's a lot of presentations which I can dive into that, which are all very good and which you can check out both, I think, on the symposium they did it in the past and also through the ANA e-learning and et cetera. So there's a lot of information on that, but that's not what this particular presentation is about. It's also not about how kids will save our hobby, will be the one and only thing that can bring us to redemption, nor will they destroy the hobby by their obsession with video games, nor will they confuse us with their weird preferences and antics. That's not what this presentation is about either. And it's also not a lament about the end times of numismatics and how we're all doomed. That is for a different day. And I am actually way more optimistic about the future of the hobby than some are. So that's also not what this presentation is about. What is this presentation about? It's about young people who are already collecting. It's about both collectors who are young children and are just getting started, but also collectors who are my age. I'm 17, and how they are already approaching the hobby, having been in it for a couple of years maybe. And we'll talk about what kind of collections they're building. How are they approaching building their collection, and is it different than other numismatists that we see at different ages? We'll also talk about where they get their information. How are they approaching learning about numismatics, and again, how does that compare to other ages, and what are they doing it the right way? We'll also discuss how they use the internet to engage numismatics a little bit. That alone could be its own multi-hour presentation, but we'll dive into a little bit how they use the internet to really engage numismatics and how it, in a lot of cases, it's kind of supplanted their interaction in person in numismatics, and so whether that is a good or a bad thing or both. And also we'll talk about the inclination or lack thereof to join legacy organizations like the ANA, the ANS, specialty clubs like the Numismatic Bibliomania Society or EAC, or even local clubs in their area that have been around for a while. And we'll dive into some of the motivating factors behind whether or not they're joining those clubs. So first, let's talk about what younger collectors are collecting. This is a question I get a lot at shows and online for a variety of reasons. One of the main reasons I get this question quite a bit is that a lot of dealers, for example, at shows want to make sure that kids that they can best accommodate kids who come by their booth and can actually help them out, either point in the right direction or helping them get that coin to the kid themselves. But it's a really tricky question to answer, and it's not one that is readily accessible and easy to choose. Younger collectors tend to have the same general range collecting interests that you do, or that collectors of all ages do. There's not really a function of age that affects how they're choosing what they collect, but there are some patterns. A lot of young collectors, at least in the United States, are focusing on U.S. federal coinage, and of course that's a wide range of things to collect, but it tends to follow along those general trend lines. If you go outside the United States to younger collectors internationally, there's a bigger variety for sure. A lot of young people tend to collect coins from their own country, but even domestically, there's also a good number who collect world coins, paper money, tokens, metals, etc. They just aren't a majority. But something else to consider, as with most collectors, that a lot of young collectors collect multiple things. So it's not just one thing. And if you go to summer seminar, the young numismatists are all stay in one dorm together, and a lot of the time, of course, they're pulling out their coins to show each other at the dorm. And I've been at many late night sessions in that dorm where people are showing up their collections and buying and selling it, and the expanse is shockingly broad. So it's fun to see that, and it's not worth discounting. And of course, young collectors aren't typically buying multi-million-dollar coins. They just don't tend to have the resources for it. But it's also very important to assume that, or to not assume rather, that they're not just buying inexpensive ones. Young numismatists tend to have quite a bit more money, at least than I remember when I was like 10 and started in the ANA. Now it seems like people my age have a lot more money coming into it. I see some young numismatists, especially ones who have their own kind of vest pocket dealer businesses going on, but they're buying $10,000 coins plus, both online and at shows, and paper money as well. And so they're really coming with money to the market. And that's an important thing to realize, no matter what position you are, in terms of how they're approaching the hobby, their mindset coming in. And what the future of the hobby looks like. They're buying not just under $100 coins, they're buying multi-$1,000 coins. Also, I've noticed a lot of young collectors tend to focus on quality over quantity. There's a thing called box of 20, which you may or may not be familiar with, which is where rather than buying a whole ton of coins, you buy a box of 20 really nice ones, and you focus on that quality over quantity. And that could be a typeset, that could be a set of bust halves, whatever it might be. You're focusing on those really nice ones, and so quality over quantity tends to be the mandate for a lot of, or the preference for a lot of young collectors, which I think is a good thing. Of course, one of the things that a lot of young collectors learn early, and which you may or may not agree with, is spend the most you can afford on a coin, so that you're not just buying a bunch of cheap kind of junky ones, but you're actually buying nice quality pieces that will retain their value going forward. So it's been interesting to watch students pass up the opportunity to simply take the many but less high quality route. They're also selling, and I kind of mentioned this earlier in the slide, but a lot of young people are very interested in kind of vest pocket dealing, and even setting up tables at shows. You see online that a lot of them are setting up tables at their local shows, but more importantly, a lot of them are going to these national conventions or even regional ones like Fun, and they are. They're really making a pretty handsome profit, and they're finding communities of other youth who are also dealing, and they're doing dealer transactions among themselves. And so you're seeing what comes out of this is a lot of young people coming into the hobby with quite a bit of personal spending money, and they're actually having an impact on the market in that way. And they're also coming in and buying nice pieces and building nice collections. Which is really interesting to see, and I think is entirely a good thing. But they're very professional about it, and it really does make an impact. As a case study of how wide-ranging the collecting interests are of young numismatists, I thought I would take the last 4 YNs of the year and kind of show how they have widely different interests. And so we go back to 2018, Abby Zeckman, who's a friend of mine, who also has a great presentation on getting young collectors involved, if that's something that you do want to see a presentation about. She has quite a range of collecting interests. one of which is Hobonickel. She both carves them herself and collects them. So that's a bit of a more niche thing, but it's one of the things that she's known for. She also does early American coppers, which is, you might agree, quite a bit different, but she has an interest in that as well. She collects red books and has continued to grow her collection. And she also collects pop culture numismatic items, especially around Marvel, Harry Potter, etc. She lives right by Disneyland and Universal there, and so I know she's been a big fan of those. In 2019, Kenny won, and he collects primarily world coinage, and does quite a bit of different things. He also sells world coinage, has a very successful business, and he also has quite a successful online presence with numismatics, which we can jump into a little bit later in the internet section of this presentation. But a very interesting guy as well. In 2020, Garrett won Wine of the Year, and he is a big guy in cap bust coinage. He does a lot of die marriage research and collects, I believe, by die marriage, and he's become quite well known in the field of cap bust coinage. Obviously, different than the previous two YNs, but and a little bit more expensive in a lot of cases to pursue that full set, but very interesting stuff as well. He also does U.S. currency to some extent. And then, of course, I was Wine of the Year this year, and my own niches are sample slabs, which I'm a big fan of, and that those are the promotional slabs that grading companies will give out for different events. I also do numismatic literature. You can see some in the back right behind me here. And I do tokens and metals and world coins with like a particularly unusual history. And that particular interest has grown out of my presence online, trying to promote numismatics, where I try and share the weird stories behind numismatic objects in my collection. And I found quite a bit of interest in exploring just kind of the weird stuff that you can find with a bit of an unusual background. So you can see there's quite a big range of interests. And the last 4 wines of the year, we all came up in the hobby about the same time. But despite our very, very different interests, we have found both amongst us 4 and among the broader YN community, especially at Summer Seminar, quite a good friendship, I think. And so it kind of showing that another approach of YNs is not to so much divide themselves based on interests, where all the people of one interest are in one organization and all numismatists with another, or in a second organization, but rather we're all kind of finding each other as young people, especially given that there's somewhat of a more limited amount in person, and finding bonds through that rather than through the collecting interests. So where do young collectors gain their information? This is an important question, because that heavily affects not only the future of the hobby in terms of making sure that students are well informed and they're not getting tricked, and they're making wise decisions about their approaches, which is really important for the health of the hobby, but also just in terms of when we're trying to educate the next generation of collectors, how should we approach doing that? A lot of you in the audience have expertise in your area of numismatics, and hopefully are passing that down. And so that is something that is worth considering. So, of course, there's the internet, and we'll jump into the internet a little bit. But of course, there's the internet in terms of how a lot of them get their information. And then to some extent, they also get their information from other collectors in person, as we all do, at shows, at events, whatever else it might be. They are often looking for mentors and people who can give them good advice and patient advice. And so to some extent, there's that. And so in terms of the internet, it's kind of broad to say the internet, and numismatists tend to blame both their woes and successes on the internet as a whole a lot of the time, but just saying internet doesn't really give a good picture of the breadth of information online, the many avenues to information online, and so it's worth noting that part of the internet, and a large part of where young collectors are going, is social media. For example, Instagram, the photo sharing app that's owned by Facebook. There's also to some extent a community on Facebook. On TikTok, the video app, there's some, and on a variety of other platforms to a lesser extent. And these social media platforms really do fill that form of social interaction, and I'll dive into that in a little sec. But they also pursue forums, the PCGS forum, NGC forum, Coin Community forum. The forums tend to have a slightly older age, just based on my observations, but they're also interacting in that way online. So there's part of internet that involves them trying to learn through interacting with other people on social media and forums, but there's also, to some extent, they're trying to learn through the internet from static websites, and that could be everything from the ANA website or the Newman portal, or even a big percentage of young collectors, since they do U.S. federal coinage, are looking at like PCGS coin facts. Also the young dealers are doing that as well. And so coin pricing is no longer really a thing that the students are going to the Red Book for example. They're not gonna pay that money for a Red Book. That the pricing data is outdated pretty quickly. There's more up-to-date information on coin facts, and they're able to look at recent auction results, whatever else it might be. So they tend to use websites instead, and they also use apps. CoinFacts has an app, as does their grading system, and so the websites, which are less about interaction with other collectors and more about pure information, are also used to some extent. And kind of getting back to the other collectors in person at events, a lot of young collectors, especially those who are new and who haven't really been to an event before, have only been to a couple, those who are younger, under 10 years old, and also those who are transitioning from online. And what do I mean by that? A lot of collectors are getting their start online. A lot of young collectors are getting their start, and when they start going to their first in-person event, whether that be a local coin show or a national coin show or summer seminar, they're often a little bit lost because it's a whole different environment. I still get I get a good feeling when I walk onto a bourse floor and see all the activity going on, but coming in as a new collector can be pretty intimidating. So at these events, young collectors are often looking for those who are kind and patient and helpful in educating them and willing to set aside a little bit of their time and teach them a little bit. Presumably, since they're already collecting, they know a little bit, but making sure they have more of that formalized education to some extent. It doesn't even take long, just 10 minutes or something like that. And so a lot of shows do have things like a treasure trivia boost and YN corners and all that. But if you're in a situation where you see a new collector who's clearly a young collector and already getting started, it's really worth taking time to give them 10 minutes and just express that patience to them and express that help and help them learn or even just direct them the right way. And that will actually pay dividends both for you and for the young collector. So it is highly worth it to invest in that. And that's where a lot of young collectors get some of their information and some of their introduction into the in-person world of numismatics. So we should talk about where young collectors also aren't getting their information, and that is books and legacy magazines like Coin World, like the Numismatist, and it's a problem that they're not getting any really of their information from books and these really well-produced magazines. The reason it's a problem is a lot of really good original research is going into these books, and a lot of really solid information both for reference and for reading, and so having this issue where people aren't willing to buy these books and spend money on these books tends to lead to less, honestly, just less information. Not everything is available online, and due to copyright, not everything can be on the Newman portal. And so it's important that students are still buying books. And so solutions are not super readily available to me. It's part of a culture of young collectors where they're just buying the bare minimum kind of stuff that they need, and they are getting most of their information online. But looking for incentives to encourage more students to buy books and to read books is, I think, something that we should be looking at as a hobby. One of the best solutions I've seen is that the ANA for their Young Numismatist literary contests. If you place in the first, second, or third place, you get tiered amounts of Whitman credit, and you can go buy Whitman books. I think first place is like $500 in Whitman credit. Second place is like $100, something along those lines. Or second place is $250, and third place is $100. And it encourages students to go buy books about the hobby, which I think is a good idea. And more ideas similar to that need to be explored. But as I assume many of you in the audience realize, it's really quite crucial that we expand their access to books. In terms of magazines, this both applies for young collectors who are already involved in the hobby, but also young collectors who might be operating in a silo. A lot of young collectors are kind of your typical case where they're kind of at home doing it on their own, maybe collecting 50 state quarters, maybe collecting random foreign coins, and they're not really tuned into the hobby as a whole at all. They're kind of doing it on their own. How do we reach them? How do we get them more involved in the hobby? One really prime way to do so is through these magazines and just trying to make sure there are as many places as possible. Part of the reason I got hooked in numismatics was reading the articles in the Numismatist and really being fascinated by what I had to say and what the context behind these pieces of history were. And so looking for ways that we get the magazines in more places and not just available to full year subscribers, I think is key. Putting the Numismatist in Barnes & Noble, like there's one solution right there, right? Having it on the newsstand in Barnes & Noble would allow collectors to young collectors to maybe glance across that and become more hooked into the core of our numismatic hobby. But that's just one solution, really off the top of my head. Looking for new solutions and new ways to get students involved in these legacy magazines and books, I think, is really crucial. And somewhere else they're not getting their information very specifically was Summer Seminar 2 years ago and last year, because they were canceled because of COVID. And it's totally understandable they were canceled because of COVID and for safety, but Summer Seminar is one of the most important events for young collectors for a couple reasons. One of which is that it is one of the only places where you're able to really interact in close quarters for an extended period of time with other young collectors. At national conventions, sure, you might run into some other young collectors, but you're generally staying in different places. You have very different tasks on the agenda, and there's no kind of organization around it. Summer Seminar, you're organized around each other, and the young numismatists are very, very close together. And what this means is that almost any collector who goes to Summer Seminar, any young collector who goes to Summer Seminar, I have yet to see really any who are no longer collecting. Summer Seminar tends to make you a lifelong collector, and it tends to be a really good avenue for having young collectors who are just kind of starting, or young collectors who have been in it for a little while but are kind of hesitant. It solidifies their passion for the hobby, as it did for me. It's also a really good avenue for information and for learning, both from the formal classes, but also from the other collectors who are both young and old. And so it is been a real setback to have Summer Seminar canceled the last 2 years, because there's been fewer students who were able to continue engaging, and that 2 year gap, we don't know what kind of impact that will have. Hopefully not too bad of a one, but hopefully this is a more solvable problem. My fingers are crossed that by next year that the situation will be resolved. But that is also something to keep in mind for yourself as you're interacting with young collectors, whether that be at your local club or with your regional organization or whatever else it might be, is that one of the primary ways that I've seen and that many other young collectors have seen to solidify someone's support for the hobby is sending them to Summer Seminar. And if your club has the funds to help a young collector do that, I would highly recommend that they will stick around for quite a long time. So how do young collectors use the internet to engage with numismatics? This is a really common question as well. It's one highly worth considering, because the way they interact with the internet is really key in their perspective on how they approach numismatics. It's really not possible to fit in an hour-long presentation, as I said at the beginning, but we could go into a little bit of a deep dive. First of all, something worth noting is that the internet is the primary entry point for a lot of collectors, especially those early ones who I discussed are kind of working in a silo. They tend to be they tend to kind of enter into the organized hobby through online, and this could be through an intentional act where they're Googling coins basically, or something along those lines, and they end up finding online communities. Or it could be unintentional. The algorithms of these online social media and forums will snag them in, and so they'll be scrolling along through videos of cute cats, and then a coin one comes up, and they express interest in that, and the algorithm recommends it more and more, and they become part of that hobby. So it's not only the entry point, but an early engagement point for a lot of young numismatists. It's where they're meeting other collectors and kind of understanding what the hobby is about, and they're engaging with other collectors for the first time, and that is a really crucial time, because that's a lot of time an indicator of whether they'll stick with the hobby, so they have a good first experience there. And so the internet being the primary entry point is, of course, both a good thing and a bad thing. The overarching good part is that it's very easily accessible, and it's possible to access the entire world very quickly, generally for free. Very good thing. The worst part is that there's a lot of aspects of the hobby which can't be as well captured online as on the internet, or as in person. And so there are really negative ramifications, in my opinion, if young collectors only stay online they're collecting and never at least partially transition into in-person collecting as well. And we can get in that a little bit. And in my opinion, the ideal approach now is for us as collectors to meet young collectors who are starting out on the internet where they're at, meet them on the internet where they're at, and then bring them to in-person experiences, and try and encourage them to go to these, whether it be a local show or a national show or summer seminar or whatever else it might be, is to encourage them to get that really true numismatic experience per se. And one of the best examples I've seen of this, genuinely, was this thing called Witter Coin University. You may or may not have heard of it, but Witter Coin, which is a dealer or coin shop down in California, arranged for a lot of students on Instagram, basically, to come and fly out, all expenses paid, to San Francisco, and learn about numismatics from top instructors, and have that sense of camaraderie and community with I think like 25 other collectors. And that was a really good way to transition students who are primarily doing stuff online, though not all. A lot of them were longtime collectors who had done stuff in person, but bringing all these young collectors in person, and really showing them what the hobby is all about. And that is obviously an expensive proposition, but one that works quite well. An important lens as you think about how young collectors are approaching the internet is that for a lot of them, the internet meets all the needs they see for numismatics. It covers all the aspects of numismatics that they think exist, and in a lot of cases, they cover a lot of the aspects of numismatics that even we, as presumably more experienced and longer time collectors, we also see in numismatics. Both in terms of the social aspects, the financial aspects, the collecting aspects, all these different things. A lot of young numismatists are finding online. As a case study of that, we can look at Instagram. This is probably one of the bigger platforms where young collectors find community online. And it's hard to tell how many there are in the platform. I think there's probably about 50 to 60,000 total collectors of all ages, and a really decent size of that is young collectors. But it's really difficult to tell because, of course, there's no easy way to tell. You can kind of just judge based on the large numismatic accounts, how many followers they have. And Instagram has a lot of functions. Primarily, you can share photos of your collection. And that's what I do. I have a numismatic account on there. I share photos of my collection. And I've received quite a bit of interest, not only from collectors, but also from non-collectors, when I share the stories of those. And they can share their experiences. Whenever a major show or event is going on, my feed is inundated with pictures of people at that event having a good time. Instagram is great for buying and selling, both publicly and in private chats. And it's really hard to get a good estimate of how the scale of how many transactions are going on. But there are some seriously large businesses which are run by young people or people in their 20s and 30s, which do make quite a bit of money. And I've asked around, I've done some estimating, and you're probably looking at about $1 million a week in sales. It is quite significant, because there's a lot of different accounts doing a lot of different transactions. There's even an auction function. Instagram has live streams And you'll see 100 people on a live stream bidding on pieces that other collectors are selling. And interestingly, in order to avoid fraud and deceit, there's quite a big community of people who are enforcing and quickly blacklisting people who are to some extent trying to get an advantage over people, which creates actually quite a generally safe community to buy and sell it and buy auction items in. They're able to converse with friends. There's group chats, there's private chats, everything you can think of. There's a bunch of group chats where young collectors are able to talk to each other and share their experiences, which is great. And they're even able to take part in contests and raffles. NGC tends to run contests on Instagram, and they've been quite successful in not only marketing their brand, but also getting people involved in that. So, and of course, they're able to learn. They're able to not only learn from other collectors, but learn from the posts from collections, and that's quite a good way. And so you can see that there's a bunch of different aspects of numismatics that are covered within the functions of Instagram, and that the young community of collectors has really found a community. And there's also an international and national audience, right? People from all over the world you can easily connect to and can follow, and who can follow you and share their experiences, which isn't always possible at your local Seattle. I'm in Seattle. My local Seattle show doesn't have people from all over the world, and so having it one easily accessible online is quite a joy. And for example, I believe it was yesterday or 2 days ago, a community of collectors hosted their 9th Instagram coin show per se, where they all post things for sale with the hashtag Instagram coin sale. And if you click on that hashtag, you can see all the people who are selling it, and it's kind of like a virtual coin show. And there's quite a bit of fun with that as well. So they're even getting that function of coin show. So like I said, Instagram is a really easy point of access, but it's not just for individuals. It's also for businesses, NGC and Heritage and PCGS and Stax Bowers and dealers and coin shops. All are coming out of this platform, and they're finding great success, not only finding an audience and sharing what they know and teaching, but also in making money. Also, organizations are on there. The ANS is on there, the US Mint is, the ANA, and they've had a little bit more limited success for a couple reasons, which we can dive into at a later point. But they also are able to easily, for free, make an access, meet thousands of people really quickly. One other case that I want to dive into is TikTok, which fewer of you may be familiar with. It's a video sharing app which has gotten huge, like a billion users around the world. And the numismatic community, the numismatic community on there is not as social. It is way more a one-sided teaching platform in terms of numismatics, and it's much more educational and less about the interactions between young numismatists. And it's heavily centered around kind of that clickbait. Did you know a 2001 penny is worth $10,000? And it could be in your pocket, and but it gets views. I mean, those kind of things attract people. One account on TikTok, which is exclusively about coins, is 2.7 million followers, which is, I've never seen any kind of social media account about coins get that massive. But they have 2.7 million followers. They regularly get hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of views on their videos. And even though they do tend to go around the did you know blank is worth blank, the kind of structure, if you read the comment section, it's not only people asking questions about their own coins, but also talking with expertise about numismatics, which is really important and is really quite key, in my opinion, that 2.7 million people are interested enough in coins to some extent. And also the videos aren't just did you know blank is worth blank. They also do have some educational stuff, but it is really worth noting. Another completely different TikTok account has 646,000 followers, and it's entirely about coins again. And something to note is that TikTok's audience is 60% between the ages of 16 and 24. So a lot of these are presumably quite young collectors, and that is a very good thing. And if not young collectors, people who are interested in learning more. So what does this mean? It means it's a really good opportunity, in my opinion, to capitalize upon these young collectors who are likely not as formal collectors and not part of these organizations and not necessarily part of these in-person shows. How do we take advantage of that? Well, with these huge audiences, I really think it'd be worth organizations like the ANA to partner with these existing accounts and have these existing accounts push to ANA membership in some way, or push to events, whatever else it might be. And this could apply to any organization really, but this would not only grab new collectors, hopefully, and get them into the hobby, but also in solidifying existing casual collectors and getting them more involved in kind of the formal structure of the hobby. Something that a lot of organizations have run into problems with is that they see the internet has had grabbed young collectors in such a way that they try and launch their own platforms and their own accounts and whatnot. But a lot of the time they don't have the professional expertise or the time or the money to really pursue growing these accounts. And so it's really key to partner with accounts that have already found success and use their large audience to drive more engagement with your organization. So I think that these huge, massive accounts represent not only a positive thing, but also a great opportunity. And then they also really affirm my personal philosophy, where I am less cynical about the future of the hobby than many I run into, which is that I do see a lot of collectors online on both Instagram and Facebook, or Instagram and TikTok rather, who are, whether they be just starting collectors or honestly quite experienced collectors, really engaging with the hobby just in a way that we don't see when we're in person at shows. You might see only 5 young collectors at any given show, but that there's probably hundreds who are simultaneously taking part in numismatics online. So it's harder to see, but I am optimistic that there are still good numbers of collectors. Tangentially, at the recent Pacific Northwest Numismatic Association show that I was at, there was actually quite a good turnout. We had about 35 to 40 young collectors show up at a show, which is a smaller but regional show, which is I think quite good. That was significantly higher than in past years. So I'm optimistic. So one of the last questions that we really have is, are young collectors joining legacy organizations? Are they joining the ANA, ANS, regional specialty organizations, whatever else it might be? Existing clubs have been around for a while, and really the answer is it's hard to tell, but it doesn't seem great. It doesn't seem like they really are. Corporate memberships are actually doing great. Being a member of PCGS, from my anecdotally, it seems like those are booming, and that's interesting to see. But I think a large part of that comes out of the fact that they're seeing immediate, tangible value out of this, right, and money-making value out of being a member of the NGC, or of PCGS. And as many of us know, being a member of a club or an organization is really crucial to continued engagement with the hobby. At least in my opinion, it is. Both in terms of the social community, the educational community, but also just feeling like a part of something larger and being that organizational structure. But a lot of young collectors are seeing less need for these memberships, and local clubs especially are struggling. And why is that? In conversations with young collectors, a lot of them really see less benefits out of being a member of a club, and they're not convinced that the money they pay every year is really worth it. And part of this functions out of the mindset that young collectors have of really looking for people engagement and coin engagement, and to some extent making money, but appreciating less the scholarly side of numismatics and the benefits that organizations can have. But the other aspect is that a lot of organizations themselves are having trouble making a compelling case for why you should join. Local clubs, for example, have had a persistent issue along 2 lines, one of which is that a lot of course, because young collectors are spread out all around the world, the chances of them being in any individual city is somewhat lower. The chance of a lot of them being in any one city is somewhat low. But the second piece is a lot of local clubs that I've spoken with heavily focused less around numismatics and more about social gatherings. And so it's about the chance for collectors to come together, maybe have some coffee and cookies, talk with each other, maybe discuss coins or trade some coins. But it's not as welcoming or engaging of an environment for collectors, and there seems to be fewer tangible benefits, especially for young people who are very busy. The for larger organizations and regional and national organizations, a lot of them are, I think, having an issue making a case that there's really a benefit besides their magazine. And if students aren't reading these legacy magazines, no benefit at all. And so there obviously are benefits, but they're having trouble marketing it as such. And so looking for solutions to how do we encourage collectors to join legacy organizations, that's something that I think we need to explore more in the future. One thing that I've found success in is actually sponsoring young people for these organizations, having them be members of this organization, and once they have a free year where they're able to some extent experience the benefits, they tend to continue remaining members. So that's one avenue to pursue as well. And like I just said, building incentives both on the organizational side and on our individual side for young collectors, and meeting them where they're at, and actively pushing those memberships on them is going to be really key, both to the strength of our hobby, as exemplified through those organizations, and for on the individual basis. So where does this leave us? Where does this information leave us? What is actionable from this presentation? I personally believe it is our responsibility as collectors to actively seek out younger collectors who have already started, who are already interested in coins, who are already starting to build their collections, and encourage them any way we can to become lifelong numismatists. If young collectors aren't actively given advice and helped out, it is really discouraging, and that is, I think, a bigger drag on our hobby than just no young collectors in general. Just leaving them behind is worse than not having them in the first place. And so each of you in attendance will have a different way that you'll be able to contribute based on your position, and that could be at a small or a large scale. So take away from this presentation and spend some time, I guess the next half hour until the next presentation, evaluating where your position is in life and in numismatics and how you can utilize that, right? If you're a board member of a coin organization, think about ways that you can help your organization get to summer seminar, or get a young collector to summer seminar, or ways that you can foster longevity in young coin collectors. If you're a dealer and you're set up at a show, if a young collector comes up to a booth who's already collecting, set aside some time, speak with them, and really help them figure out where they need to be and where they want to go. If you're a writer, use your literary talents to speak to young students and to work with them. If you're an educator, there are countless possibilities in terms of engaging with young collectors. If you're a donor, put some money again towards a student becoming a member of the ANA or some other, or your local coin club or whatever else it might be. Put your money to that use. That will really pay dividends for everybody involved. And if you're a volunteer, whether that be for a volunteer for a numismatic organization or a potential volunteer, volunteer. And that could be at a coin show in the YN booth. That could be really in any number of ways, looking for ways that you can actively volunteer to keep our hobby propelling forward. And so that really does end the presentation here, Liana. Overall, when you look at the scope of the young collectors who are already quite passionate, whether they've been collecting for a couple months or several years, it's reason to be optimistic. You should not take away from this presentation any kind of cynicism or pessimism, because really it seems like collectors are still thriving. That the collecting gene is still alive, something that doesn't get stopped by the changes in our world, but it does adapt, and it does adapt to where students are at. So when we meet students where they're at and get them really more involved in numismatics in a more formal, structured way, that's the key to ensuring the longevity of our hobby. And I'm optimistic that we can do it.
Alrighty, thank you very much. You can go ahead and stop the screen share, and we will take the rest of the time for Q&A. So it looks like we already have a question or two in here. For the audience members, if you have questions to send in, just click on that Q&A at the bottom and we'll get to them. Let's see, we have someone saying that apparently Colorado College has decided to open the campus for summer seminar in 2022, and the ANA is now soliciting commitments from instructors for next year. So that's all good news.
Fantastic.
How often is personal security stressed to beginners using social media? Has anyone mentioned being burgled?
Good question. So I don't really see discussions of personal security online. Part of the fundamental thing with collectors just engaging online is that they tend to be pretty technologically savvy in terms of not sharing their personal information, especially address, etc. So in terms of threats from online, they tend to be pretty safe in my personal experience. I can't speak for everyone. In terms of being safe in their own localities and speaking to other people and being very cautious about sharing the fact that they have a personal collection at their house or wherever, there does not tend to be as much emphasis. And of course, you want to make sure that they do have some awareness of this. So again, finding these young collectors where they're at online and expressing the importance of personal security to them is something that I think we should work on, which you could work on individually as well. If you wanted, I could help you with that. But also it's important when we bring these young collectors to in-person things and make them part of more of a formalized structure. We can teach them about it there.
Can you talk a little bit more about the kind of content being presented through the most popular TikTok numismatic accounts?
Yeah. So a lot of it through TikTok, a lot of it is, like I said, blank is worth blank. But it tends to be U.S. federal coinage. There's some level of like coin roll hunting aspect to it, which is kind of has that unboxing gambling kind of mentality to it. But there's also really legitimate educational content on there, not just purely like a coin price frenzy stuff. It's really quite teaching a bit of numismatic history and, hey, don't clean your coins, folks. And really, I mean, it's fundamental lessons, but it's important ones. And when you look in the comments, people are responding quite positively and expressing both interest and expertise in numismatics.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit about how that is similar or different to what the most popular accounts on Instagram are doing?
Yeah, it's like, so Instagram is a lot more about the social aspect. The most popular numismatic Instagram accounts have, well, I think the biggest one is NGC, and that has something like 37,000 followers. And they are, of course, posting coins that NGC is certified, plus some level of contest. But there's also really big individual accounts. Some of the biggest ones are dealers who post quite frequently, both lessons about the hobby, as well as coins from their shops and personal collections and talking about those, and who regularly are posting stuff about their experiences at shows. So really regular posters who are doing a wide variety of content and have this platform where they have generally more expensive, nicer, beautiful coins. But there's also quite a big following for just other collectors who are buying and selling. Some young collectors have 10,000 followers and a lot of that roots out of them buying and selling coins that people are interested in. So the most popular accounts are really widely varying.
Alrighty, here's a little bit more of a comment that you might want to ruminate on a little bit. Our local coin club, while high on social functions and camaraderie, works hard on the inclusion of YNs and educational sessions every meeting since I joined 35 years ago. I find that our requirement for an individual to have at least one show and tell item for a meeting opens everyone up to new items they don't collect and may never have seen before.
I think you're absolutely right. And that's a really good idea, which I'll try and pass on, which is, bringing in at least one item automatically seems to incorporate an educational aspect from what you're saying, which is important. There's a numismatic dinner club I know in Virginia that I read about in the Asylum, called Numis Nova, where they do bring items to share, and so that incorporates both the social aspect and, of course, educational aspects. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that's the last question we have in here. We do have just a comment sharing that Abby Zeckman is also an exhibitor and won the Y Investor Show at the 2018 World's Fair of Money.
She did. Very talented.
And here's another one. Can you talk a little more about the extent to which young collectors are interested in modern US coins besides quarters, for example, silver eagles, commemoratives, perhaps modern gold and platinum, etc.?
Yeah, bullion is big. But and to some extent it has to do with the money making aspect of it, where they try and speculate and make money. But it's not a super large proportion of young collectors who are doing U.S. federal. The people who do bullion do it hard. They do it well. They do it fully. But in terms of number of collectors who are collecting U.S. federal, it's a small proportion. In terms of U.S. federal, it really does widely range in terms of what their focuses are. Very few collectors are trying to do a thing where they collect like straight up US federal typesets. I haven't really seen a whole ton of that. They tend to focus on one series and do it very well. And I think this comes from that perspective of quality over quantity. They're not trying to do everything. They're trying to really focus their efforts in one particular area, like Garrett, who's doing cap bust coinage and knows that area very, very well. And so they really focus on being comprehensive in their subject, which I think is a good thing. Specialization really does allow for young collectors to make good decisions, pass on their knowledge, and kind of carry the torch in terms of leading specialty organizations and leading specialty niches in the hobby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I worry somewhat from what you've told us today about the focus on the financial side of the hobby, because it sounds like the conversion rate from collector to numismatist is quite low, especially if there's very little interest in historical information. How many of these collectors do you think are likely to conduct original research in the future?
Yeah, I think that there is interest in history. I really do. And the reason I think that is because of my own numismatic account, where I only post coins from my own collection and I write about their history. And I get very good engagement from collectors and non-collectors about that. That is what a lot of people, a lot of collectors who are in this hobby, a lot of young collectors, they enjoy the financial aspect, as we all do, but they're really in it because they love the numismatics, and they love the pieces themselves. And I really do think there's that interest in the history, but they're not becoming numismatists, like you're saying. They're collectors, but they're not numismatists, and they're not approaching it in a scholarly way. They might know, hey, the 1943 steel set made out of steel, right? Because they need a copper, and they enjoy that and they appreciate that, but they're not going deeper, and I think they should. But I don't think you necessarily need to worry yet. I think we're able to convert them if we continue to make conscious efforts. Again, like going on TikTok and finding these accounts with 2.7 million followers, most of whom are young, and looking for ways to organizationally partner with them and translate that from collectors into numismatists. In terms of scholarly research, I don't know if I can give you a good judge on that, both because the bar for what scholarly research entails might be different between our definitions, but also because a lot of students, I think, won't necessarily start doing scholarly research until they're having mentors who are helping them through and showing them what kind of scholarly research is being done and how it's being done. I hope it continues, but a lot of students, I think, are coming into a thing where the internet has so much information available about all these different fields that any of the kind of stuff they are looking for in terms of their coins, they're kind of able to find that information, and any inclination to dig deeper into areas we don't already know is both a little daunting, but also often unnecessary for the collections that young collectors are building. So I hope it continues, and that'll be something we should work on, but I'm not worried yet.
Are there very many young collectors interested in paper money, US or world, and are there any areas in particular?
There are young collectors interested in paper money. It's fewer than US federal, and I think it's something we should foster more, because paper money kind of gets the short end of the stick a lot of the time. But there are definitely people interested. I see it online, people collecting. Weirdly enough, and this might just be my experience, a lot of the people who are doing paper money also do vest pocket dealing for paper money. There's not a lot of people who are just solely collecting paper money, and they're not dealing with the selling aspect of it. But they're not just dealing with, like, modern small size notes. They're doing older, expensive pieces, and they are quite knowledgeable about everything about these pieces. And so it is really a sight to see them really working with dealers at shows who are doing huge volume and really large transactions, and they're doing like wholesale and dealer to dealer and retail. It's exciting to see that there are collectors interested. I couldn't tell you though if they're members of like paper money societies. I don't know. I'm not really as attuned to that side of things, but I hope they are. And if they're not, we should look for ways to illustrate the benefits of those organizations to them.
Alrighty, then this next one is the last question we have for now. So audience members, go ahead and type quickly if you have more questions so we don't cut you off. For now, do you feel that Coin Week celebrations, as in like Coin Week, not Coin Week, the news outlet, setups at libraries, etc., help bring young people to local clubs?
So none of my local clubs do Coin Week setups, nor have I ever seen any in general. My inclination, so I couldn't give you a full perspective on this. My inclination is to say, honestly, no. The reason being that, local coin clubs really do take time to go to, and a lot of young collectors may not be able to drive and have to rely on a parent to get there, which adds a whole nother complication. I was fortunate when I was younger that my parents were able to drive me to my local coin club, which was actually quite far away, and go to these meetings, but most people are not able to do that. So that's another problem that local clubs are really experiencing, is it takes time. I talked to some local coin clubs though who actually transitioned to Zoom during the pandemic, and they had a young collector join them. But in person is difficult. And convincing a young collector on a Friday night, instead of going and hanging out with their friends, to go to the basement of a lodge that's kind of a little bit dusty, and convince a parent to come too, so that they can drink coffee, is a difficult sell. Not to rag on local coin clubs too much. This is the challenge that they face. National Coin Week displays, I do think, have potentially good power to get people, young collectors especially, interested in numismatics in general, and perhaps interested in pursuing a set of their own, but in terms of translating that directly into organizational and formal structure numismatics, I'm less optimistic about their ability to do that translation.
Very fair. Okay, then that, I believe, will wrap up our Q&A. Nope, someone just put another one in.
Sure.
To the point you just made, do you feel Zoom plus in-person meetings would help with participation in local clubs?
Zoom plus
Yes.
Local? No. Which seems like an opposite answer, but if moving back to in-person club meetings, I'll share this as a non-coin example. So I'm involved at my high school with some clubs, and part of what the school requires for us now is that if you have an in-person club meeting, you also need to have a Zoom aspect for people who aren't comfortable being there. And so someone sets up a laptop and they log into Zoom, and either nobody comes on the Zoom, or someone comes on and the laptop gets turned the wrong direction and they can't participate fully. And they're looking at the wall, and they're not, and no one's checking on them. Like, it is a very isolating experience and not a fun experience to be the only person on Zoom watching something else happen. Especially, I imagine, a local coin club where it's a lot of, in my experience, muted conversations, transactions. It's not so having both happen is not. You need everyone present in either location. Everyone present in Zoom, though of course Zoom is always not ideal for local clubs, or everyone present in the in-person meeting. So as nice as it would be to have that hybrid, it would just be logistically. And this is nothing to say of, these are at my high school tech savvy students who have been using Zoom for the last 2 years versus those who have probably not used Zoom as much. And so everything about that just logistically would be difficult.
Yeah, we have someone in the Q&A who said, my local clubs are trying it and the Zoom side gets the short shrift. Backing up your point, the technology isn't there yet. There are some auto tracking 4K cameras on the horizon, but nothing cheap yet. So yeah,
I mean, and clubs don't have huge budgets to kind of do this stuff either, right? I mean, if there are meetings over 40 minutes, the person can be kicked out. So yeah,
for sure. Okay, one more time. That
Okay.
was the last question in the Q&A.
Sure.
So if nothing else pops up in the next minute, we'll be good. In the meantime, thank you very much, Kellen, for taking the time to come back and join us. We loved having you back. And it's great to get some younger blood in with the presentations and talking a little bit about the generations to come.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. And the audience members, thank you for watching. Hope to see you back. Okay, that was a comment. Hope to see you back at some of the other presentations today. Coming up after this, we have Jake Utz from CoinWorld, who will be talking about a new app of theirs. So if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about technology, there is an opportunity for you. I believe that will wrap us up here. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and you, of course, as well, Kellen.
Thank you.
Thank you.